Police have arrested an alleged drug mule at the OR Tambo International Airport. The suspect was intercepted by a multidisciplinary team working together with the police. He was traveling from Sao Paulo and connecting to Nigeria. In the last 2 months, police have seized drugs worth 13 million rand and arrested 9 drug traffickers at the OR Tambo International Airport. In a statement, National Police Commissioner General Fani Masemola has commended the men and women in blue for these arrests. He's once again reminded criminals that South Africa is not a playground for drug trafficking. Now, for a discussion on the rising incidence of drug trafficking, I'm joined by Thabang Bogopa, who is a crime analyst. Thabang, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. So we saw the arrest earlier today of the alleged drug mule at the OR Tambo International. Are we seeing an uptake of people coming into South Africa with illicit drugs more and more now lately?
Thank you so much and good evening. Indeed, it is worrisome that we are seeing more drug mules being arrested for trafficking of drugs, particularly when it is someone who's not even a citizen or a resident of South Africa. They were just passing. So they were dropping the drugs apparently according to the modus operandi and passing to another country. But what should be worrisome is the fact that it is only the accessories after the fact who are being arrested, meaning it is someone who can easily be replaced and the crime can still continue. So we do really hope that as this, meaning the real drug lords being arrested, the people who were supposed to receive the consignment and the people who have sent the consignment or sent the drug mule to be receiving the consignment. But overall, I think it's a big ups for the multidisciplinary team and the SAPS in particular.
It most certainly is. I mean, you mentioned that the uptake in non-South African citizens being the ones passing through our borders with these drugs. Why do you think that is? I mean, General Masemola said that South Africa is not a playground for criminals and that they should be reminded of this. Why are we seeing more and more people taking advantage of South Africa in this sense?
Yeah, firstly, the justice system in South Africa has its own challenges. Among those challenges being that it takes so much before a case can be finalized in South Africa. That's the first one. The second one, we've had General Dr. Lebeya speaking last week that they are understaffed within the DPCI, grossly understaffed. That is an advantage, meaning there's people who were able to conduct these crimes. And also, there's this general notion that in Africa, South Africa is one of those countries that are very lenient in terms of law enforcement. I'm telling you, if it was other countries, soon people would be panicking. Even their embassies would be engaging with South Africa that, can you please give us our person? Can you please allow us to trial the person in this country, not in that country? But if it's in South Africa, the people are not worrying. They know that somewhere next week they might apply for bail and be granted bail. If they are not granted bail, they can still enjoy the luxury of being in South African prisons. So that is one of the reasons why even international people are taking advantage of the landscape, criminal landscape in South Africa due to the challenges that I've mentioned within the criminal justice system and policy.
That's very worrying. But of course, I mean, in the last 2 months, 13 million rands worth of drugs has been seized just at the OR International Airport. Does this mean that police are on top of things?
Yeah, I would say it's the tip of the iceberg, because if you've been to OR Tambo, I frequent OR Tambo, you'll realize that over 80% of the law enforcement or security detail there is private. That is a big challenge that you should be worried that when you go to other, even Sao Paulo, where this criminal guy was traveling from, when you are in Sao Paulo, you are searched by the police of that country. When you are at the counters, when you are supposed to leave, it is customs of that country. But when you arrive in OR Tambo, you look at those people who are checking you there. It's normally often not even customs, it's private securities that are there. So it means that if this crime is mainly perpetrated by organized crime syndicates, it's easy for organized crime syndicates to own a security company and know that we are going to be receiving drugs through our own personnel. So we ought to also look at the security detail of one of our main port of entries, which is the OR Tambo International Airport.
You mentioned that this is just the tip of the iceberg in finding the person that comes into the country with the drugs and not necessarily the root cause and the source of where these drugs are coming from. Where are these drugs going to? Where do we see the prevalence of where they're distributed to?
Yeah, in the main, I would say it's the entertainment industry for just general consumption, leisure consumption. That's mainly where they are going. But there might be a possibility of some illicit medical products or medical products that are unregulated that are also having those drugs or illicit drugs. Because you look, some of these drugs in their nature, they are performance enhancing drugs. So it's those drugs that someone would need in order to be active for a longer period or active just, oh, also people who commit other types of crimes, they would need to be so high that they do not have gut feelings and all those. So that's the common market that these drugs would be sold. But also, if you check some of the mainstream entertainment places, particularly in Gauteng, Cape Town, and Durban, you'd find that there's a high prevalence of drug consumption in those areas. And that's where these drugs are going. And these people are moneyed. If you look at the consumption rate at those, some of these, I can't mention names, but some of these trending places, there's a high consumption rate of drugs and illicit substances.
What we're also seeing is South Africans that are up in arms, especially on social media platforms where campaigns have been put together where communities are complaining about drugs such as Nyaupe heroin, which is finding their ways into townships. And a lot of the times the blame is being put on illegal foreigners, especially those that are running spaza shops within those communities and those areas. Do you find that there's a prevalence there? Is there any sort of, is that the picture that's currently on the ground, or is it just in small pockets that sort of make the picture seem so big?
You know what, Carl's spaza shops are actually benefiting a lot from illicit drug and substance distribution. Because I've also intervened in some of the schools whereby I was invited to say, we are seeing behavior that's abnormal. And only to realize that when these kids go to buy just a normal pen, they buy a pen which is filled with drugs inside, and then they will open the pen, and a normal unsuspecting teacher would not even realize that these kids are 90% under substance of drugs when writing examinations. So it's indeed true that some of, by undocumented foreigners, for that matter, are actually distributing drugs, which is why some of their sustainability is questionable. To say this person has so much small spaza shop, but they can hire 3 or more people of their own nationality, and they can sustain this spaza shop at very reasonable prices. But then you now realize that, okay, there's secret recipes that in the background, they are actually distributing illicit drugs.
So, I mean, earlier on, you touched on the justice system, its challenges, the DPCI being grossly understaffed. What do you think still needs to happen in South Africa for more arrests and convictions to happen so that we are able to paint that picture that South Africa is not a playground for drug trafficking?
Yeah, there's no easy solution to this massive problem. But mainly we need to capacitate our law enforcement agencies and the courts. Also, the rate at which the court cases are being finalized need to be improved, because nonetheless, even if a court can be ready for this case, we're still going to wait 6 to 12 months for the forensic science laboratory to release the results that those substances are indeed drugs. We still need to wait for the digital evidence, the CCTVs that are involved in this case. So we need to capacitate the law enforcement agencies in terms of making sure that they release court-ready evidence in a shorter period of time. And on the other side, we need to capacitate the National Prosecuting Authority in terms of having sufficient prosecutors, and the judiciary in terms of having sufficient magistrates and judges to make sure that they are able to preside over these matters. So it's multi-departmental challenges that the South African Police Services, the National Prosecuting Authority, as well as the Justice Department, they all need to be capacitated. But then the giant problem, then it's now the correctional services, whereby we need to see more rehabilitation happening, because we have a high prevalence of repeat offenders in South Africa. The same person is a repeat offender, they are given their sentence, they serve half of the sentence, they get parole, they come back, they do the same crime. Sometimes they feel that this person has a previous conviction in Gauteng. Now they are committing it in Northwest. So we need to up, and also through the budget, we need to capacitate more of these departments. One of the segments that has been neglected in South Africa is witness protection. We need to rehabilitate that program of protecting the main witnesses who would tell that, to tell you the honest truth, here at OR Tambo, so and so are at the core of making sure that this crime happened.
All right,
because if ever we arrest a mule today, the same person who's enabling the crime to happen is still working there at OR Tambo, or is still working in the South African Police Services, or is still working in NAT joints, or is still working in the National Intelligence, then we are still having the same problem. They're going to recruit one innocent person again. Tomorrow the person can be lucky or unlucky. The drugs, we are not even sure if the drugs will be distracted according to legislation. The drugs might come back to market, which we have seen in several cases.